2019 meeting of the Architectural Review Board of the City of Palo Alto. If you could call the roll, please.
Yes, good morning, board members. Chair Firth.
Here.
Vice Chair Balte.
Present.
Chair Liu. Sorry, Board Member Liu.
Present.
Board Member
Perennial
Hirsch.
chair.
And Board Member Thompson. Present. Thank you.
Our most senior member. Now is the time for oral communications. That's a time for anybody in the audience who wishes to speak to an item that is not on the agenda. I have no cards. Does anyone wish to speak under oral communication? Seeing no one, we'll go on to agenda changes, additions, and deletions. No, none of those. City official reports, transmittal of the ARB meeting schedule and attendance record, and tentative future agenda items.
Yes, so just related to the future agenda, we're going to have 3 items on the March 7th agenda. So Mercedes will not be heard quite yet. We will have the 233 University. We're not going to have the Master Sign Program. We will have 375 University, and then the 180 El Camino will be heard.
So those are both preliminaries. Whose master sign program was that we're not hearing?
I believe that's the hospital.
Okay. Thank you. And then we had talked about scheduling some other additional items at our future meeting, namely an item to discuss projects recently reviewed by the board and what has happened to them since. So that will be on our next agenda as well, in some format or another, which we will figure out.
Yes, so I will work with the chair to figure out that agenda item.
Thank you. Anything else anybody wants to put on a future agenda?
Just wanted to note, I will have a planned absence on July 18th. July 18th, long time from now, but.
You'll be absent that day?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we probably should start thinking about our summer schedules. Thank you, Osma. That's a good reminder. All right. Our first item, public hearing item, is a quasi-judicial matter. It's at 695 Arastradero. It's a request for a recommendation for approval of a major architectural review to allow the construction of a new single-story building of approximately 5,400 square feet with a partial basement for mortuary use. The planner is Claire, and the applicant, sorry, I meant to make a note of this. The owner is the Alto Mesa Improvement Company, and the architect is John Barksdale. Could we have the staff report, please?
Good morning, board members. I'm Claire Hodgkins, and I'm the project planner. As you noted, the proposed project is located at 695 Arastradero Road at the existing Alto Mesa Cemetery, or Alto Mesa Memorial Park. The entire cemetery is a 72-acre site comprised of 6 parcels, and the proposed project is located centrally within the park on a 47-acre parcel. And the site is zoned RE, residential estate, and the land use designation is open space controlled development. The project includes a new 5,400 square foot single-story building with a partial basement at the existing memorial park. And the building would be used for services and service receptions. It's a reception pavilion. And the building would not be visible from outside the memorial park. So some key considerations are just the, the proposed materials of the project, the proposed design, and the parking and circulation. In particular, with respect to the proposed design and circulation, board members during the preliminary hearing had noted in particular some concerns about the front entrance not being defined enough, so it wasn't clear kind of where the main entrance would be, and generally about the circulation on the site. The applicant has added ADA parking at the front and a turnaround at the front to kind of define that entrance, and it's also provided a more defined kind of entrance feature to really clarify where the entrance to the building is. So staff recommends that the Architecture Review Board recommend approval of the proposed project to the Director of Planning and Community Environment based on the findings and subject to conditions of approval of the project. And with that, I'll turn it back to you and recommend you hear from the applicant as well.
Thank you. Before we do that, since this is a quasi-judicial matter, we heard it before as a study session, has everybody visited the site?
I visited the site on Tuesday.
David?
Yes, visited the site.
Yes, I did.
Yes, I visited the site several times.
Oh, okay, so as have I. So we've all visited the site. Does anybody have any ex parte communications to report with the applicant or anybody else? Nobody does. Thank you. If we could hear from the applicant?
Good morning.
Good morning. You have 10 minutes, and if
My
you could
name-
spell your name for the transcriber.
My name is John Barksdale, B-A-R-K-S-D-A-L-E. I'm the architect on the building. At our last ARB hearing, two suggestions were brought up. One was a concern about the vehicular and pedestrian circulation getting to any services in the new building. And secondly, it was unclear as to what the main entrance was. We had 4 possible candidates, only one which was to be the main. So we were unable to change any of the roadway circulation because the established roadways have grave sites right up to the edges of them, and that obviously cannot be moved. So the site as it is what we have to work with. Normally, visitors to the cemetery come in and they know where they're going and they go directly there. If they don't, the first building they'll see is an administration building. They'll stop and get directions. But for services, what Alto Mesa does is their staff goes out and becomes traffic directors, and they have specific plans as to where they want people to park so that the other parts of the cemetery are still freely accessible. So they have them on site, and they also have some temporary signage, and they'll be directed on past the administration building. And the next building that they will see is this one. They'll come directly into it, and we've added this new entrance canopy to make the entrance more obvious. And we have a circular turnaround in front of it for people who want to drop people off and then go on and park. Otherwise, they'll continue around this circular site and parallel park. If that parking is all full, they'll just continue on down on into the cemetery roadways and parallel park otherwise. In addition, we've added a sidewalk around the perimeter of the site, leading in 2 directions to this new entrance statement, so that people can get on that as soon as possible and get off the road and get to the entrance. As far as the entrance goes, as I say, we added this canopy with a pyramid-shaped skylight on it, which gives it some height and protection from the elements. It comes right up to this turnaround, or this drop-off area. And on the rear of the building, we have a service entrance which had glass side lights and a glass transom and a wood door, and we've played that down with solid siding material and painted hollow metal doors so that won't be confused as an entrance. And on the sides of the building, we have these courtyards, which are integral with the design and function of the building, very inviting. But they're enclosed with these 4-foot-high niche walls, which have niches on the outside that are people can visit without going into the building, and there is a walkway to those. We've minimized that entrance to that area, and we've screened them all with shrubbery to keep people, to discourage anybody from thinking that that is a way into the building. So we hope that that satisfies the concerns of the board, and that's all I have to say. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Barksdale?
Yes, if I could, please.
Vice Chair Baltic.
The circle you're engraving in the pavement in front of the proposed building, what is the diameter of that, can you say?
I don't have that off the top of my head, as we made it fit a normal vehicle.
That's my question, I guess, really, is it possible for a car to make that circular turnaround
Yeah,
there?
it is. It's, we also wanted it centered. I mean, I could make it bigger, but it wouldn't be centered on the building axis.
Would it be possible to get that measurement today somehow, if you could just scale it off the drawings for us or something? It just seems to me that it looks a little bit tight, and I'd like to check that. Thank you.
Okay.
I had one question about the landscaping. I'm looking at sheet L1-1 or L1.1. And of course, what I was trying to figure out was to what extent are these local indigenous drought-resistant plant material capable of providing what you want. And I think of plumbago and nandina and olives and many of these plants as not local. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about that. It's not keyed as to which ones are local indigenous drought-resistant plant material and which ones aren't.
No, the landscape architect is just recently moved his office from Palo Alto down to Monterey, and I discussed it with him whether he should be here or not, and he suggested that if you had some concerns about the landscaping, that possibly we could make it a condition of approval and have whoever is concerned about it deal with it at a...
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Any other questions?
Yes, I do.
Board Member Hirsch.
What are the possibilities that the area, the kind of columbarium area around the perimeter, will be used at the same time as a service that would be within the building?
Is that, you're not going to do that, or are you? So
Could you repeat that into the microphone, please, or introduce yourself? Again?
I'm Marilyn Talbot. I'm the general manager. We generally coordinate services so they're not at the same time. So other than visiting maybe those outside niche walls, people can still visit them, but we wouldn't have a service at the same time we have a service inside the building.
In the area, in the perimeter, the columbarium area where you have niches,
The outside niches.
I'm
that
sorry,
we-
could you lower the microphone so it's going to pick up your voice a little better? Thank you.
Are you talking about the niches that are proposed on this
the
building?
niches area.
Yeah.
What are the possibilities that somebody would be visiting at the same time as
Oh,
a
that would
service?
that could be a possibility.
Okay,
Yeah.
What
But
are
we
the-
have separate entrances to those niche walls.
yeah, okay. What are the possibilities that there'd be a regular mausoleum service happening at the same time as this reception area?
Well, we coordinate everything on we consider traffic control and coordinate where services are. So we tend not to have services at the same time so people can have their privacy when they have their service.
Okay.
I do want to
And
note,
as it might affect parking,
so I do,
you would direct the traffic in such a way? And
Yeah, we're very proactive in parking. And just because, it's difficult just getting there, trying to get up Arastradero Road.
Yes.
And people get, by the time they're there, they're a tad agitated. So we're very proactive in parking, and we schedule services so they don't conflict with other people's
Thank you.
services.
Yeah, thanks.
And Claire, did you have something you wanted to add?
I do. I just want to note that I did put a condition of approval indicating that there wouldn't be multiple services happening at the same time, that the addition of this pavilion wouldn't mean more traffic for the area because the services would generally be coordinated, which was noted in the applicant's proposal, so.
Thank you. Any other questions before the,
I had a quick one.
Board Member Thompson?
So for the niche wall, that's in the 4 quadrants of the 2 sides. Is that, in the renders, you don't actually see the cavities. Is that something that will be covered, or will the urns be visible?
They're generally covered with a, right now, granite. They're covered with granite, so it is like a little spaces that are covered. They're all covered. And then they've got little rosettes with tamper-proof screws on it, so nobody can mess with them.
Okay, so it'll just kind of look like a wall from the outside.
Yeah, it'll look like it's usually polished granite, so it looks reflective on there, so it's all clean.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? I'll bring it back to the board for discussion then. Osman, do you want to start? Oh, and we have a model to look at. Oh, sorry. Is there anybody in the public who would like to comment on this project or application? I have no cards, but does anybody else wish to speak? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing part of this proceeding, and let's start. Osman, do you want to go first?
Sure. Although, are the materials over there? Okay.
Is there a materials board? Yes.
Yes.
In general, after visiting the site, it was quite evident that the design seems to sort of sit nicely in the landscape. The pyramid skylight kind of seems like it'll have a nice relationship with one of the other buildings that's kind of further back in the site. I'm not actually sure which building that is, but there is a building that has a pyramid roof on there, and so in that sense, it's kind of thoughtful architecturally to do that. In general, I didn't see very many issues with the design. It seems like it'll be a nice, quite thoughtful space. One concern I had is potentially in the back where the service entrance is, as it abuts that adjacent building, that space could get kind of dark potentially, but I don't know that that's anything that you can avoid necessarily. And then I did have some questions about the niche, which you answered for me. So in general, I would say I'm pretty supportive of this project. Curious to hear what my other board members think.
Thank you. Peter, Vice Chair Balde.
Thank you, and thank you. I generally agree with Ozma. It's a good project, and I can recommend approval. I would like to discuss a little bit the turnaround in the middle there, in the front. By my scaling of your drawing, it's about 29 feet in radius, so just less than 60 feet in diameter. And for a residence, that just barely works. For this type of service and building, I don't think it's quite big enough. And I think just by twisting a building a bit and shifting it over, you probably can get that to work just a tad better. And I think it's probably important that it does comfortably accommodate even a larger vehicle turning around there, or else you shouldn't have that circle and imply that that's what you do there. So it's a small detail, but it's just not quite the right size yet. And I think if you just rotate the building slightly, you can keep it centered on that while you add a few feet to the diameter. Other than that, I think the building planning, the way it fits on the site is nicely done. It's logical and clear and practical. I have a second question or thought or concern, I guess, about the massing of the building. I have the building model here, and I'll point to my colleagues that it has 4 bump outs, 2 bathrooms in the front, and a kitchen and a service area in the back, that, to my eye, just sort of fight the basic architecture. You have this clean, simple, high white parapet defining the form, and it's clean and simple and timeless and everything you would expect for a building of this function. But having these bump outs below it sort of violate that. They break the simplicity. And you can see that in the way you've detailed it. It's a tricky roof condition to work with. And I guess I'm just wishing it wasn't that way, that it was all inside that clean, simple form. That said, it's well executed, so I don't suppose I can fight it too much, but it's just not as nice as I would like to see it. I do think the choice of materials is elegant and high quality and will fit very well where you're building this building, so that's all nice. My last thought, and again, it's a nitpicking thought, is that you have a bicycle rack right next to the front door under your pyramid-covered parapet entry area, and it just seems the wrong place to put a bicycle rack. And there must be someplace else on the site you could meet that code requirement for the few people who do ride a bicycle to one of these services. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Great, thank you for your presentation and thank you for the revisions to the project. I can recommend approval of the project today with the exception of landscape. I think the landscape needs to come back to subcommittee. I don't think it meets the findings for native plants. I think there's only one native plant. I think there's, yeah, and then the Bouteloua grass is a North American native, but I think I think they like a couple changes, maybe like to the ground covers and a few of the shrubs. I think you can easily meet the findings.
I was thinking trees, too.
I was not thinking of trees.
We'll see.
And I think I would support Peter's comment about the turnaround. And to Peter's comment about the massing, that did not pop out at me as being an issue. Like I didn't really see that at all when I was looking at the plans. And so anyway, so that's where I am. I can recommend approval.
Thank you. Board Member Hirsch.
You answered my question about controlling the services. That was a primary concern because I thought it would impact the site quite considerably with the double services, having so many more cars potentially. And I was a little, no, that was fine. Your answer was good. This is a very spiritual kind of a building, and I think you shouldn't comment on it without giving credit to the architect for having created a kind of a symmetrical building, which in this case I think works very well in the circle that it's enclosed in. So, and I think the massing is notable, that it maintains that symmetry throughout the building. I like the materials with some exceptions. I think the stone materials are good, but there's a lay-in ceiling on the inside, and that's not a emotionally appropriate kind of ceiling with a recessed lighting in it. I would much rather see a kind of a wood ceiling, which I think would be a better feeling, and I'm not so crazy about anodized aluminum coverings on the courtyard spaces. I would wish that they would be wood, and you have some examples of wood that you're using on the building, which you could very well use as a canopy for those outside areas. I think, however, my biggest concern is the potential lack of privacy between people using the service area inside when they come out to the courtyard and courtyards, the two of them. And if there were anybody having a private service outside in front of their own niche, family niche, there's a conflict there. And I don't think the answer to that is by putting some planters around to create more privacy there. I think you need a visual another visual separation between them, which could easily be accomplished with placing glass above to get to a level that's above eyesight without changing the nature of that area at all. And then if on the inside it was, you defined the area between the outside and the inside with some kind of a raised elements, I think you would be able to create a better separation between the possible conflict between privacy outside, people visiting their personal niche, family niche, and the activity on the inside, which is going to lead to people talking outside, meeting with each other. I don't know if you can do a separation that's scheduled so that nobody is outside. That might be an answer, but I think you really could do it with a better sense of privacy. With the glass inserted, we look at this a lot, where it relates to people using outside dining areas where the street is nearby, and you could certainly use a glazing that isn't visible through, that is decorative. So I'd like to ask you to think about that, and I would agree with I think the planting, by the way, is very good. I looked at some of the plants, and they seem to be high enough to create the privacy for the sort of columbarium use to the outside. Those are my concerns. I think this definitely could come back to committee because it's 90% of the way there. Thank you very much for the nice presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the design. Thank you for taking into consideration our concerns at the earlier session. I think part of the reason this building fits in well is that some of the other buildings were also Mr. Barksdale's work. He's nodding. So he has a long experience of this space. I have a lot of confidence in the operations ability to manage traffic flow and parking, and I appreciate the thinking about privacy. I think the materials are good. I like the design. So from my notes, I have 6 items that have been raised. All of us thinking that if at most it needs to go to subcommittee. Is that correct? I'm getting nods. Ozma?
Oh, I had a quick question.
Yes.
Of the applicant.
Yes.
I noticed that in your model, the niche walls are curved, and in the plans, they're faceted. Do you know what the design intent or what the final, should we look at the model or should we look at the plans?
Yeah, they're faceted now. The problem is there are 12 by 12 niche covers and they're 3 high. And we found that if we try to do that on a curve, they would have to kind of miter the edges of these covers, and they wouldn't go together very well. It'd be difficult to fit them nicely. So we opted to do same shape but in 3 facets so we can get straight surfaces to put these 12 by 12 niche covers tightly together.
So it's the plans that represent your current thinking,
Plans
not
are
the model.
correct. The model is.
Thank you.
is
An earlier phase.
Earlier, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. So I think we have consensus that landscaping should be referred to subcommittee so that we can make the finding with respect to native drought-resistant plants. David raised a comment about the anodized aluminum covering. Does anybody share his desire for different material? Isn't it exterior?
Interior.
I thought you were talking about courtyard coverings. Did I get confused? It's the central courtyard. Which one are you concerned about, David?
The metal, is the metal on here?
Where is it on the, is what I misunderstood where you were saying it was, perhaps.
Oh, it's okay, medium bronze. Oh, that's the storefront.
We don't generally look at interior materials. So I was trying to, I thought you were talking about something.
Well, I did. That was a lay-in ceiling grid on the inside.
Right, which is probably not in our purview, but I thought the trellis was outside.
It's exterior.
are.
It's
Are you
talking
talking
about
about
the
the trellis at the entrance?
Yeah, it's the entrance
I
trellis.
think the entrance trellis is
Right,
what you're
okay,
talking
so it is an exterior
And-
material.
And the sides as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
those.
So we're only talking about the exterior materials, right?
Well, no, I talked about two.
Okay, so with respect to the ceiling, I believe that's not within our jurisdiction because it's an interior feature and it's not, we can comment, but we can't direct.
Yeah, I think you
Accept it
can
as a
comment on
comment.
it.
Yes, it's a comment,
yeah.
that's fine. So I'm just trying to make notes here and get clear. What about the materials for the exterior outside coverings, trellises? Were you suggesting they were inappropriate, David?
I think they're using wood elsewhere. We have IP wood sliding service entrance doors. You could match up those elements with a wood ceiling. It would just feel better to me as a mix of materials.
Okay, well, that is an exterior material. Does anybody else have comments on that?
Well, I think you need to balance that, though, David, against their desire to have a very permanent feeling building. And wood will wear and require constant maintenance. And just my experience is that after 10 years, a wood trellis never looks permanent. And so I'm not sure it's a fair burden to place on them. I could see perhaps suggesting that they consider some alternative material than an aluminum extrusion, but maybe make a suggestion. But I don't think wood would be a good choice. Just shooting from the hip here.
Board Member Thompson, you had a comment?
Yeah, actually, it just made me notice, or maybe another question potentially, just to clarify the aluminum trellis that's on the sides. That's a different material than the structure that's holding up the skylight. The skylight is the zinc.
That's a question for the applicant.
Yeah.
No, I think it's all anodized aluminum. They have on other buildings tried to use brass, but the maintenance was too much to keep it up. So we chose aluminum for the window areas, and I just carried that through to the trellis. I agree would be great, but they're very concerned about maintenance. These buildings are, the Cemetery Act, building is not under the Cemetery Act, but all the other buildings have to be designed for eternity. You can't have any combustible materials or anything that won't wear forever. As I say, this is not required under that, but in keeping with that, they just are not, they don't want to get in a situation where there's constant maintenance to the materials on the building. So that's why aluminum was chosen, and then we just carried that through consistently through all the metal elements on the outside of the building.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I don't hear a consensus for asking for a change in that material. Turnaround perhaps needs further study to make sure it works, is that correct?
Peter, yeah. Oh, you mean whether I reacted that way?
No, I'm just asking, I'm trying to isolate the elements that might lead us to a motion that might pass. So I just wanted to find out on the turnaround.
Well, it'd be nice if we could ask the applicant. It seems to me, looking at the site plan, if you rotated the building ever so slightly, you could shift the circle more into the middle of that Y-shaped existing roadway and get maybe 5 or 10 more feet in diameter, which I think would make all the difference. And unless I'm missing something, it
Could you
seems a
respond to
very
that,
easy
Mr.
thing to
Barksdale?
change to make.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm not entirely happy with even with it centered on the building, it isn't centered on the roadway either. So I would be more inclined to eliminate it and shape the curb to give us the full radius, which is probably about, I'm guessing about 80 feet diameter. If we gave them the full area there to turn around and just shape the drop-off area to accommodate that and forget about the circle. The other option is just to make the circle bigger. What we have done is this building is on the same axis as the mausoleum behind it. We could certainly turn the building, but then it would.
Are we looking at sheet SK4, basically?
Yes.
Thank you.
So you can see that the axis of this building is perpendicular to the facade of the columbarium behind it. And that's the reason for that. And of course, that puts that turnaround off center on the driveway fork there where the road forks. If we were to turn the building, we could make the turnaround bigger. And that would all be fine. But then the question is whether that would look odd, that slight angle off of the building behind it.
Thank you.
Is there any particular symbolic relationship to the mausoleum or reason these buildings have to be on exactly the orthogonal grid? I don't think you'd notice it at all. The building is already at angle.
Just the proximity. And yeah, you're right. I mean, there isn't really a strong parallel axis to that building anyway. It's most of these elements are coming in at 45 degrees.
I mean, I'll suggest to you that the way it is now with the entrance just ever so slightly off-center of the roadway, I think it might look like a mistake in the end, that the building is not centered on the road as you approach it. And I don't think anybody will notice whether it's relating exactly to the mausoleum behind it. And I don't think any of these affect my ability to recommend approval, but it just strikes me that it'd be so easy to rotate or shift the building so on direct approach, it'd look good.
Okay, let's, bike racks. That's the first time I've ever heard us requesting that the bike racks not be by the front door. I can just understand why that makes sense here. Any consensus?
It's happened on other projects as well.
I just wasn't paying attention. Okay,
There
and
are
then,
places like the country club
where you really don't want it at the front door.
Well, how does the rest of the board feel about that? Because I don't mind it being at the front door as a bicyclist.
I have
It's
no
very
opinion.
convenient.
I think the code is that it has to be within, 50 feet of the front door. So why don't we put the condition is that it needs to be within 50 feet and they can move it.
You can make your own decision about what you want, the applicant can. Would somebody like to make a motion? Oh, I didn't bring up the issue of additional walls to screen the niche areas, glass walls. Is
Yes.
there any support for that suggestion?
Yes,
David, but I
That's
don't see any.
that's my major
Got
concern
it.
about the project.
Does-
And unless we could be assured that there's not going to be a conflict, if you look at a 4-foot, 4'6", 4'9" niche wall there on each of the perimeter areas, somebody standing there would be a part of the event happening on the inside. I just don't see that as a good relationship at all. If those niches were to be used, if you can assure us that there's never going to be a conflict between the use of the perimeter area, and that would be scheduled not to conflict with
Okay.
the service on the inside.
David, at
that's
this
quite
point, I'm really
different.
asking you to talk to us, not the applicant.
Okay. Yeah.
So, go ahead. Go ahead if you.
Okay, I'm trying to I thought for once we're going to get through a project in less than an hour, since we all like it.
Yeah.
But that's all right. I don't support additional wall space. I think that the applicants are good at scheduling their events, and I think that it cannot guarantee that somebody won't get the desire to go visit a niche at some point, but I'm, in this case, completely willing to defer to the owner's judgment on this issue, since they're successful operators of a memorial park.
I'll also agree with you on that. I'm not supportive of
Okay,
changing the height of the niche wall.
all right.
Kind of like the interplay.
I do support having the subcommittee look at this orientation issue. I do think it's important to have a good drop-off access point. I think that if it's possible to rotate it a bit so that you can get a bigger defined circular area, that's well worth it. Our biggest concern before was that we had this, well, I at least had this vision of women in high heels tromping through the grass trying to find out where they were going, and you've addressed that. I like that, and I think by rotating it, you can make it big enough to really work. So unless the applicant objects to us asking the subcommittee to look at that, I think we're ready to make a motion.
Okay.
Was that a triple negative? Okay, Ozma's going to make a motion. Board Member
Okay.
Thompson.
I'll move that we approve the project subject to the conditions of approval and revisit the turnaround radius or referral to subcommittee with respect to the entrance, driveway, radius, and as it relates to the building orientation, was there something else on your list?
Landscaping.
Landscaping. Anything else?
And we were going to modify it to say that the bike racks could be anywhere within 50 feet of the entrance as chosen by the property owner.
Just with relation to the landscaping as part of that motion, is there something specific such as
Yeah, it doesn't
having
meet
more
we
native?
cannot meet the findings
Okay.
because of the shortage.
Yeah, so more
Qualifying
native.
materials, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we need to see more appropriate landscaping to meet the findings there.
We're not questioning the beauty or attractiveness, but we have a requirement that to the extent possible, it use regional drought tolerant materials that provide good habitat, right? And this is this park is a good habitat for a lot of birds and insects, I'm sure, which are all becoming an increasingly short supply in this world. Is there a second? Or is there
I will second that motion.
motion by Board Member Thompson, second by Vice Chair Balte? All those in favor say aye.
Aye?
All those opposed say no.
No, with the comment that I think it could come to committee, but I'm very concerned about the perimeter walls as I've described them.
Thank you. So the motion to refer to subcommittee passes 4-1 with opposition by Board Member Hirsch for the reasons stated. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing the project.
Thank you.
And David, thank you for explaining your reservations. I always forget to ask people to do that, and according to our procedures, we do that. Do you need a break before we go to the next item?
No, we can keep going.
Okay, we're going to have a 1-minute break for staff to organize themselves.
Appreciate your expediency, Lynn. I wanted to let you know.
Applicant's request for approval of a minor architectural review to allow the demolition of 2 existing residential units and construction of a new 2-story duplex building with a full occupiable, habitable garage, basement level and detached garage. It is exempt from CEQA. A small infill new construction. The zoning is RMD neighborhood preservation, which is why it's before us. Does anybody have any, first of all, has everybody visited the site?
Yes.
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 5 out of 5 have visited the site. Yay. Yes.
If I may, if we can just change up for 2 seconds. We have a person that'd like to speak to item number 4, but needs to leave very shortly. Could we just hear that comment and then move forward?
Can do that. Let me finish asking people if they've had any ex parte communications with anyone with regard to this project.
No.
Nope.
No one has had any communications with anyone with regard to this project. Okay, we will pause briefly in this, and we will go to item number 4, which is a study session? Okay, and I have a conflict of interest on this one, so I will step away because I live there and let Vice Chair deal with this.
Very well. We're going to open meeting, the agenda item number 4, just to take public comment. We have one speaker card from Mary Elizabeth Plowder. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you could spell your name, please.
Yes, thank you. It's Mary Elizabeth Plowden. It's
Plowden, I'm sorry.
Sure, it's Plowden. Yeah. So thank you. Sorry, I have to leave for work in a minute, and I just wanted the opportunity to say a few words. I'm relatively new to Palo Alto. I've maybe lived here 3 years or so. So this whole process of understanding how to comment and how to participate is new to me. I tried to get up to speed around the last cell phone tower issue as it relates to Crown Castle and Sure Site. It was just approved a few weeks ago, and received another notice in the mail about these 17 nodes that are planned for parts of downtown. One of the approved sites in the last go-round with Crown Castle and Sure Site is across the street from my house. My bedroom's actually co-located with the height of the antenna, which for my husband and me provides great discomfort. My husband's actually an oncology surgeon, so he helps people deal with cancer all day long. And so for us, it's a very deeply, it's a hard topic. The latest review of these 17 sites that I've taken a look at, one of the nodes is actually on a street lamp right outside the building where I work. When I say right outside, I mean if I look out my window and look at where the node will go, my desk is co-located with that node. So now I've got one across the street from where I sleep, and I'll have one right next to where I work. So speaking specifically about just, beyond those general concerns, I'd like to say that I did some work last go-round as it relates to the radius of the radio frequency of these towers, and there were different nodes of radiation within which you would not want to be co-located. Obviously, this is a new project. I don't have the specs for the new project, but it's surmisable that if you're within 15 feet of this node, it's probably not something you want to be exposed to on an ongoing basis every day. And I just want to bring up that the street light that has the sign on it right now that's on the map of these 17 is, again, right next to the office where I sit. And I have many other colleagues that also sit in that office day to day within 15 feet, the wall of our office of this street light. So I just wanted to come out and say that for me, that's deeply concerning again. I also just wanted to mention that I'm getting these notices as a resident of Palo Alto. My colleagues work, they live in Redwood City, they live south of Palo Alto. They're not getting notices like this, but they're gonna be within 15 feet of these nodes. And it's not just my office, there are many other offices where that's probably the case. And I realized that there's maybe a public newspaper requirement to post meetings like this and findings, which is entirely insufficient in today's world of media where people don't necessarily read the published paper version of the Palo Alto Daily News or wherever we put that. Notification to people that work next to these nodes I think is extremely important, because if they don't get these things in the mail as downtown residents, they might also want the chance to comment and participate. And lastly, I'd say that given I have 2 of these now within striking distance of my everyday life, as a mom, as a resident of Palo Alto, I think we should just think more broadly about what we're doing in this city as it relates to all these nodes. We just approved 5, 17 more. When we talk about the health effects, do we think about the aggregate health impacts? So I'm not talking about the radius.
If you could wrap it up, your 30 seconds over.
Sure. Not just the radius right next to the street light, but if you think about the aggregate effect of people like me that live and work in downtown Palo Alto, do we know what that means in the longer run, health-wise, as it relates to all the RF emission? Thank you very much.
Thank you for speaking. Okay, we'd like to close that portion of the meeting to public comment and return back to agenda item number 3. Thank you.
Thank you. To return to agenda item 2342, which is item number 3 on our agenda. The applicant, the owner is Abdel Ismail, and the architect is Amer Ismail Design Build Group. And if we could have the staff report, please, and if our new planner could introduce herself.
Hi, good morning. My name is Emily Foley, and I'm the project planner.
And Emily, could you spell your name for our transcriber since you're new?
Yeah, Emily, first name, last name Foley, Foley.
Thank you.
So as we mentioned, this is for 2342 Yale Street. It is a duplex project, and this is the first time that it's come to the Architectural Review Board. The proposal is to demolish 2 existing residential units. It's a single-family home in the front and then a second kind of apartment-style unit over the existing garage. And the proposal is to construct 2 duplex units, so 2 attached units with the detached garage in the rear. Each unit is pretty much identical, so there's 4 bedrooms, including a finished basement in each unit. The site context is in the College Terrace neighborhood. As previously mentioned, it's in the RMD NP zone, and the neighborhood preservation overlay is why it is at the ARB meeting today. And in the general neighborhood area, there are single and 2-family and multiple family residential on 3 sides of the development, and neighborhood commercial small office buildings to the north across the street. For the site plan, it's a duplex, so the 2 units are attached, but the second floor roof forms are slightly separated with decks in between. The parking is in the 2-car garage, and there's 1 uncovered space as required by the zoning. And there is usable open space. Each unit has a 99 square foot deck and a 59 square foot deck. The front unit has 483 square feet of usable open space, and the rear unit has 422 square feet of kind of landscaped open space. These are the current elevations as shown in the project plans for the front and rear, and for the 2 sides. The entrances are defined as well as the 2 units being pretty much the same, so the 2 sides of the building look very similar. As previously mentioned, this project is not subject to CEQA, and staff is recommending approval at this time. Thanks.
Is there a materials board?
Yes, the applicant said that he was going to bring an updated materials board.
If we could have that, please. Thank you. Any questions of staff before we hear from the applicant? If we could hear from the applicant, please. And if you could, as everyone does, spell your name for our transcriber.
Sure.
When you introduce yourself.
My name's Amir Ismail, A-M-E-R. Last name Ismail, I-S-M-A-I-L. So our objective...
Excuse me, I forgot to tell you, you have 10 minutes,
Okay.
which we will now start.
Yeah, our objective is to build a duplex that will help improve the area. Currently, the existing building has kind of a 0 lot line along with the adjacent buildings. So we think that the building that we're proposing improves that.
Could you speak a little closer to the mic? I'm sorry, our mics require that you be quite close.
Okay. Yeah, so that we feel that the building that we're proposing improves that by following the setback requirement on the left side and the driveway on the right side. separates this building from the current neighboring buildings. In the design, we tried to follow the guidelines as closely as possible. One was we placed the garage in the back of the property to mitigate its visibility and also kind of match the neighborhood. The driveway, we tried to minimize the width of it as much as possible. We also are proposing Hollywood strips with landscaping in the middle and providing a planting strip on the right side for plants for screening landscape between this property and the neighboring property. Our original design, we had a kind of a larger second floor, so we reduced that by increasing the footprint of the building. That way, kind of minimizing the second floor walls. We also to kind of also meet the guidelines in terms of height and massing and scale, we set back the second floor walls from the first floor walls all around by about 3 feet. We located 2 upper floor balconies in the center of the building to that way separate the second floor from each unit. So again, to kind of minimize its mass, and also that helps with the roof scale as well. And we took into consideration the windows and so that they don't have direct sights, and are proposing screening landscape in the appropriate areas.
Does anybody have any questions of the applicant, architect? Doesn't look like. I had one question.
Yeah.
Do you know how many bedrooms there are in the existing buildings on the site, total?
There are, I believe there's a total of, maybe 6 bedrooms.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
had a quick question.
a quick question before we hear from the rest of the public?
It was a material question. Should I ask later?
Yeah. Why don't we ask questions later? We'll have a chance to respond to the public, so let's hear from them, and then we'll do a second round, so you may be seated. I have one speaker card from Taylor Brady, professional engineer. And Mr. Brady, if you could spell your name and give us your address, if you would.
Absolutely. Yes, my name is Taylor Brady. That's Taylor, and my last name is Brady. And I was already going to begin my speech this way, so in the interest of full disclosure, I will state that I am a resident of 2342 Yale Street in College Terrace neighborhood, occupied Mayfield. And I'm also a licensed civil engineer in the state of California. My license number is C88968. In the event that any present here today would like to look it up through the Board of Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists. I have practiced structural engineering since earning my bachelor's and master's degrees from Stanford University in June 2013 and March 2016, respectively. Germane to the discussion today, I've been the primary structural designer on numerous residential buildings of similar type and scope to the proposed project, as well as many more commercial, industrial, and multifamily residential structures of significantly greater size. I'm here this morning to publicly express my opposition to the proposed demolition of 2342 Yale Street. Since my vested interest as a renting resident of the subject property is obvious, I will not belabor the point. However, I would like to focus my speech on 3 other points. The first is the incompleteness of the most recent drawings currently available to the public via Palo Alto's Excella Citizen Access portal as of 2200 hours on February 20th, 2019, i.e. last night. The second point is regarding the historic nature of the property and its situation in the College Terrace neighborhood. And the third point is the impact of the demolition on the city's more broadly stated goals of sustainability and affordable housing. The most recent set of drawings available for the project is the set dated November 19, 2018. While these drawings may meet basic requirements for an architectural set, in my professional experience, the design reflects a project at the end of schematic design with only the basic massing and architectural program established. Critical details such as wall and floor assemblies, waterproofing and fenestration, drainage for decks, and guardrail attachments are not present in this set. Moreover, while a building of this type is feasible to construct, no structural system has been designated either for gravity or lateral loads. Looking more closely at the presently submitted drawings, it is possible to see that with building step-backs and different floor layouts level to level, structural framing for discontinuous bearing elements, that is, beams and columns, will need to be specified. Additionally, no lateral system is proposed, and while myriad systems are possible for such a structure, perhaps timber shear walls or steel moment frames, a careful inspection of the present architectural programming and fenestration reveals that such critical structures are not accounted for. They're not continuous walls which could be used as shear walls, nor are there locations for frame elements to fit. If the structural system is tasked with accommodating the present architectural program, then the gravity and lateral systems will require numerous discontinuous elements, each of which will have to be individually designed, and which is not, again, while feasible, an insignificant design task. This is to say nothing of the structural details that will be required for construction of the presumably truss roofs, the connection of discontinuous vertical force-resisting elements to supporting members, and more.
Mr. Brady, I forgot to tell you that you have 3 minutes, so would you take another minute to address your other issues?
I suppose so. I'll just sum up this section really quickly. I just think that it would be in the city's best interest to review and comment upon much more complete drawings before proceeding with the permitting process. Regarding the historic nature of the building, it is admittedly of amateur and local interest, but it is these footnotes of our neighborhood and our town's history that are those that are being erased. Frank Miniker, the builder of the building, was one of the earliest occupants of the College Terrace, or what became the College Terrace neighborhood, and ran a smithy in Mayfield before it was annexed by the city of Palo Alto. Individual structures such as this one may not have the polished corbels or prettily painted balustrades which draw the attention of architectural historians who are mere decorative fetishists for the prominent styles in the neighborhood, although I do happen to think that the periwinkle channel siding and elegantly curved rafter tails of 2342 are worth noting. Nevertheless, the eccentricity of such lots and their placement, the way they permit access to thoroughfares in the neighborhood, is a unique aspect that cannot be discounted in an assessment of the building's place in the neighborhood.
Thank you. I'm going to stop you, but some people may have questions for you, and if there's any written material you want us to submit or drawings, please do. Does anybody have any questions of Mr. Brady before we go on? Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak to this item? All right, the applicant have any responses to the comments or anything else you wish to say? Okay. Staff, have any comments after hearing from the public?
I just wanted to comment on the adequacy of the plan set. It is a planning application. We do normally get schematic drawings at this stage. But one thing that I do hear the residents saying is that maybe the later structural design will be very complicated. And so we do ask, because we have architects on our ARB, I think you can speak to that a little bit. Related to historic, we have done a historic analysis of this property, and it was deemed to be not historic.
So who did the analysis, and what were the standards used?
So it was a DPR, a Department of Parks and Recreation primary record report. It was probably Page and Turnbull, but I don't have that.
I think it's on page 112 of our packet. Do I got, which page is it, 112?
I don't know that
So we're using the state standards, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. I don't know that we put the historic report in here in the packet because we weren't anticipating that that would be a major concern.
Was that done in-house?
It was done by Page and Turnbull. And
Back
so
in the old survey or more recently?
Recent.
more recent, August 21st, 2018.
Thank you. And is that available to the public if they want to see it?
Yes, I believe it's uploaded to
Thank you.
Building
We had another question for staff. When we went out to look at the site, we didn't see any project sign. And we're concerned,
yes.
I mean, it's odd not to hear from neighbors in a project in College Terrace.
Yes, Board Member Liu had brought that to our attention, I believe, yesterday, so actually maybe 2 days ago. And so yesterday, we spoke to the applicant, and Emily made sure that the sign was up again. They found the sign. It had just been maybe knocked over or something.
Thank you. All right. Alex, why don't you start?
Wait.
People in the
Can we do questions of the applicant?
questions, all right. You know what, I'm going to have us combine our questions with our comments, if that's all right. Or
Okay.
is it a very basic? Go ahead, if it's a very basic question.
Just a clarification on the balustrade, the guardrail for the balconies. The drawings are showing a different kind of perforation than the material board.
Yeah, it was hard to model on the drawings,
Can I see the materials?
the screening that we'll be using. That's why we included it on the material board.
So it'll be the pattern on the material
yeah,
board. And
yeah.
is that kind of a gold finish?
They have several finishes, but most likely we'll be picking a finish that will be matching the cladding on the windows and doors, as well as the guardrails.
So is that the darker?
The darker, yeah.
Ah, okay, so there will be dark guardrails. I see. Okay. All right, that's all my questions for now.
The people in the middle hardly ever start. Why don't you?
Great. So thank you for your presentation. And I want to disclose to the board that I've also looked at some additional information on this project with regard to the historic houses on Yale Street. And they're on the past website. So I think the city has picked out the ones that are truly historic. And one of them is on the national, one or two of them are on the National Register. And so I think, that the city is paying attention to that. We don't have a historic neighborhood here, like in Professorville, where there would be design guidelines. So we don't have that in this particular neighborhood, however. So I think my main concerns on the project are the location of the trash, because it's next to one of the bedrooms.
We
Okay.
actually, on the updated drawings, we actually relocated those to the back.
Great.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Behind the bike lockers.
Okay, excellent. So that's one. Two is the driveway width is only 8 feet. And that might be fine for like the Hollywood strips if you're only parking in the back and if nobody's ever parked on the driveway itself. But I mean, I think normally I would look to something more like 10 feet so that you can actually, if there's a car there, you can actually walk past the car. So that's a concern. Also with the, in the landscape plans, I think you're showing lawn in between the Hollywood strip driveways. And I think my comment is that I think that looks good. It's really inefficient to irrigate, so you're wasting a lot of water for a very little bit of grass. And there are some ground covers that are really tough and don't require a lot of irrigation. And I was trying to look it up in my notes that I have for other projects. I couldn't find it, but I think there are recommendations out there for that. And similarly with the turf stone in the back, if there are people park, I think of all of my neighbors, only maybe like 10% park in the garage. So if you've got turf stone in the back and people are parked there, then that's not going to, I don't think that's going to work very well with the irrigation. So I think that's another concern of mine. I think I'm okay with the buildings. I think generally I would, to get more compatibility with the neighbors, I would ideally prefer like siding and a steeper pitched roof. But I don't think that our zoning really requires that in this particular case. I was looking through the zoning, trying to carefully, and I don't think that that's part of the requirements on this particular site. So I think I can recommend approval otherwise. And I think that's all that I have.
Thank you, Alex. David, or it should be Peter, who's doing the middles out.
Very well, thank you for the proposal, for the presentation. Thank you, Alex. I'm going to follow up on what you were saying. Vis-a-vis the driveway being narrow, I have more fundamental issues with the basic site planning here. I don't think the garage, the way it's oriented, works, in the sense that certainly from the farther back space, it's next to impossible to get out of that without backing all the way down that driveway. And then the driveway being only 8 feet wide makes it a very challenging task. And it seems to me that you could rotate the garage and push it to the other side of the property where it's facing directly on the driveway, and then you might be able to back out in a hammerhead turn and turn around and still use that space to accommodate your other parking. And then when I was thinking about this more, I saw an earlier application you'd made with a totally different site plan where you had in the middle between two separate buildings a whole parking arrangement, which seemed to make a lot more sense to me. And it just really left me scratching my head thinking that we just fundamentally don't have a very good site plan here. You're covering up most of the property with this driveway, then trying to hide it as turf stone, and then making it also function as the entrance to the back unit, and pretty well ensuring that nobody's ever going to actually drive back there because it's so tight to get back there or to turn around and to have to back down the driveway. Just a lot of places just don't work to my way of thinking. And I'm sorry to have to say that to you, but at a core level, I don't think the site planning is really functioning well enough. I'd like to address the second comment I have, which again Alex touched on, and I think I draw a different conclusion. I don't think the building is compatible to the neighborhood. It's a neighborhood full of wood siding, detailed, more traditional looking homes. And you have a very tall facade with not too many openings, and it's just plain plaster all the way through. And you're saying it's contemporary style, but I don't really see it that way. I just see it as just being a big plaster box right now. And that may be the case that, as Alex points out, the zoning code doesn't explicitly prohibit that, but I think it does require us to find that the building is compatible with the neighborhood and fits into the character, and I just don't think it does. I think it's not a positive addition the way it will look now as compared to what's there now. And you don't have to copy what's there, but I think architecturally the style now is not fitting into anything. It's not really contemporary, and it certainly doesn't pick up on the cues from the charming buildings nearby. So I think a wood siding, more detail around the windows, things like that would really help a lot to make it fit in. Or if you want it to be more contemporary, that's fine, but then really design it that way. Perhaps change your roof forms a little bit, accentuate the strength of the tall stucco facades. But right now, it's really not doing it for me that way. Last general comment I have is regarding privacy issues. And this building is required to meet the individual review guidelines. And as I see it, you're proposing 4 generous-sized upstairs balconies, which are you're in tight neighborhood, tight conditions here, looking over into your neighbor's properties. So your solution is to put a 5-foot privacy screening in front of them. And certainly on the 2 middle balconies, the ones contained between your upstairs units, you have 3 solid walls, and then all you have left on the 4th side facing out is now a 5-foot metal screen. That's a very mean type of balcony. I can't imagine it being pleasant to sit there. Even more so as the roof eaves come in on both sides. The space is maybe 7 feet wide and the eave comes in almost 2 feet on each side. You're left with almost no sunlight, very little view to the outside. I'm left thinking ultimately this will be closed in and made into another part of living space, or that screening will be torn down, violating our privacy guidelines. It just seems to me an inappropriate place to be putting a balcony, or you should be articulating the massing of the building such that these are on corners or somehow fitting in better. Right now, they feel like leftover spaces between 2 upstairs buildings that you're doing to meet the FAR or lot coverage requirements. I'll grant you those are onerous and challenging requirements to meet, but they shouldn't be thought of as leftover spaces, which is what I see those balconies doing. So I'm going to summarize to my colleagues that I think the site planning doesn't work yet. The building really needs to be more contextually compatible or architecturally different. And I have serious issues about the privacy due to those upstairs balconies. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Well, I agree with a number of comments already made here. This is a block, it's a kind of a unique and wonderful little block by itself. All these buildings on the block have quite an interesting character to them, especially the Painted Lady down the street, a Victorian honey of a building, you know. And I feel very strongly that you could have looked at your neighbors and picked up materials that would relate much better. I don't like the stucco particularly at all on the outside of this building. There are areas of Palo Alto, most of Palo Alto, in fact, where you have significant lots or space to work with, and the neighbors are a variety of styles, but this block is very consistent, and it should remain that way, and you could very well have chosen to have a wooden look to the outside. I didn't realize, looking at the roof material color, that it wasn't a tile roof because it tends towards looking like a stucco tile, Spanish style building, but doesn't make it in that category either. There's plenty of height capability here that you aren't using, and I think a lot of the possibility of making it a taller, more vertical building would give a much better dimension to this building idea. I'm impressed with the kind of planning of taking the same scheme in the front and rotating it around and making it work on both sides in planning, but I agree with Peter that the question of how you deal with those outside areas on the roof don't seem to work well as an outside balcony, and how that you would change that in planning, I'm not sure how you could do that, but I think you need to look seriously at that. This building cries out for a front porch. The proportions of the front of the building are really not pleasant at all. There's a lot of blank wall, one window over a kitchen counter, a corner window, change of window type at that point. So I find the whole front to be unsatisfactory, and if you look at precedents in all of Palo Alto, you'll find that a front porch, a more generous kind of relationship to the street would be very important to this building and would work much better with a wood look to the building as well. Wood siding, I would say, would be more appropriate to this building and to this street. I would like you to study, I think, the outside proportions of the windows and bring back a better look to the whole building that way. And in particular, you know, when you make a decision to have an entry straight in from the front, and then the other one is in this rather narrow passageway for a vehicle where perhaps vehicles would be stored. In fact, you won't have any room to get in that door. But you do have an area in the back of the building where there's a yard between the building and the garage. And I don't know why you don't really use that to create an entry similar with perhaps a porch as well that related to that back unit. Well, I mean, I really would like to see this building proportioned differently. Higher pitched roof line would work much, much better in the scale of the street. You have recessed window frames in the stucco wall, whereas, as it was noted, there's a possibility for framing in such a way that you express the window better with a frame that you read on the outside. I think it would be a much preferred way of presenting this kind of a building on this block, and there's no other similar kind of recessed window frame the way you're showing it. I think the design, in general, I'm honestly not happy with the way the building looks at all. And I think that more of a study of the Palo Alto kind of housing would benefit this considerably, and in fact, more study on that very block of the relationship to the neighborhood would give you an opportunity to improve this project when it comes to us again. So
Thank you.
Not in favor of
sorry.
voting for the project.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you to the tenant for coming to speak to us. Ozma, I completely forgot you. So far to the left.
I went and saw the site and everything. Well,
Why we usually start at one end.
I'll try to keep it short. Mainly everybody said what I've written down here, but in general, I'll just reiterate the ones that I think are important. So I agree the facade is lacking. While there is a bit of stucco in the neighborhood is made interesting by the siding and the paneling, and that level of detail is important for a residential feel. Also, the drawings are a little confusing. It looks like there's two types of railing, but they don't match what's in the material board. And in general, that level of clarity is really important for us to evaluate if this building really works in this context. The rails are rendered as white, and they're not going to be white. They're going to be black or very dark. That's a problem. There's also these extra ornamental elements at the entries that aren't very well detailed. It's a little hard to know exactly what's happening there, and I understand it's a level of detail and scale, but in the face of this otherwise very blank wall, I don't think that relationship is very clear, or that it's working. And a material board should also actually have the actual materials versus just pictures. That's important as well. Agree that the lawn choice, the choice of using lawn, is not a very good choice, that there are better choices out there that are more better for water use and aesthetics. And I didn't have these notes before, but after having heard them, agree that the narrow driveway is a problem. And the privacy at the balconies, it's interesting. I'm an extrovert, so I don't mind hanging out with my neighbors as much, but I think it potentially could be a big problem that people might try to board up or try to, you see people add like extra things and they always keep their windows closed, and that space, while it looks great on plan, ends up not working out in real life. All right, that's all I got.
Thank you, and apologies. I think I cannot support this project as submitted. And I'm sorry, because I don't like to say no to proposals for housing, even when they're not increasing the housing. One of the interesting things about this is there's 6 bedrooms on site now? 7, according to the audience. So this one is 8, possibly 10 if the offices are actually used as bedrooms, which is a lot for a parcel with very little parking and very little bicycle space. But my principal concerns are different. Our zoning doesn't protect this street or our regulations as a historic neighborhood. It might have been eligible, but College Terrace has not cared to be designated as a protected historic district like Ramona or Professorville. And so that was, in a sense, a neighborhood choice. And the state standards are fairly explicit, and sometimes additional research turns up information that changes the results, but I'm going to defer to the study for the time being. I'll certainly go read it. But my big problem is that the side of Yale that your building is on is the boundary of the residential area that's College Terrace, the part of land that Stanford didn't get, our historic holdout. And it's remarkably consistent. In fact, all those wood front houses so tight together, it's almost like looking like, buildings on a wharf. I mean, they go one after another. Sometimes they almost touch. They have wood siding, they have framed windows, they are strongly vertical, and they're fairly simple. They stay in their boxes. They don't go off in odd directions. And to me, this building doesn't do any of those things. I will say the roofing material is consistent with the neighborhood. But in that neighborhood, stucco tends to signal multiple family or commercial across the street. And on your side of the street, it's wood. And this suggests to me the erosion of the residential neighborhood. It makes like a hole. It's like it's a gap in the smile. I'll stop with the belabored metaphors. It doesn't meet our standards for requiring compatibility. I agree that we don't have the explicit requirements in neighborhood preservation standards that we do in some others for materials, but I think it fails to meet our other review standards. I think the driveway doesn't work. I think the orientation of the door onto the driveway doesn't work. I think the balcony, and when I say work, I mean that I think people living there will have difficulty using them without conflicts with each other, and you try to design so as to minimize the irritations. I'm concerned that the open space does not appear to be functional to me, and open space is not just supposed to be a square on a plan, it's supposed to be something that adds pleasure to the neighborhood and the users. Because it's beautifully planted, or you can sit there, or there's a significant tree, not just something that meets our minimum dimensions. I can't be more consistent with that. I can tell you that I spent a lot of time working with historic preservation rules, and they don't require that new construction look like it's old. In fact, they prefer that it not look fake old. So I can imagine a building that uses wood siding and wood-framed windows and a better relationship to the street and more clearly signifies we're in College Terrace, that looked very modern, but was clearly done by a designer who respected what's there and tried to design a building that not only looked good for itself, but made its neighbors continue to look strong. I wonder if it's a little too big. I sort of share, when I hear that the driveway is too narrow to be functional, and this is a tight lot, I think that maybe it's a little too intense a development that for what actually fits on this lot. Also, the landscaping as proposed doesn't meet our standards, which require, where possible, the use of regional native plant materials that provide good habitat. I can't see any reason why that's not possible on this site. So staff, since we are not prepared to recommend approval today, judging by the comments received, what kind of motion would you like? What would you like us to do?
I would ask that we continue to a date uncertain.
Thank you.
I move that we continue this project to a date uncertain.
I second that.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. It's not unusual for us to be unable to approve a project on its first vision, and I hope that working with staff, you can come to a project that we will be able to approve. Thank you for coming to speak to us, and we will go on to our next item. Before we do that, I need to say that I will not participate in the next public hearing item because I live at 216 Everett and therefore live in the neighborhood. Maybe while staff is getting ready for the next item, we could review the Architecture Review Board meeting minutes for October 18th, 2018. Any comments?
Well, I'll bite into that, sure. I think the minutes for the meeting itself are fine, but I'm quite concerned about the way the subcommittee hearing has been presented. This is the second time we've talked about it, and right now it's very confusing which items are being discussed in the subcommittee meetings. If you read it, it states one of the projects and has a few comments about what happened. It doesn't say which committee members were involved in that hearing. And then below that, it segues into comments which I think are about the police station project, but it doesn't say that it's that project. And again, it doesn't identify who's speaking. It seems to me just deficient. We need to have minutes that capture that stuff.
So if I may
that's
ask,
on page 17 of the minutes.
Page 17 of
And it should
what
be,
minutes?
right, and there are two subcommittee items, and one of them,
Are we talking about October 18th?
October 18th, and one of them should be the public safety building, and it's not, there's no header for the public safety building.
Yeah. So I can take a closer look at that. We don't normally list out, I mean, we can list who the subcommittee was. We don't normally list out like who said what. It's meant to be just more of a summary, but we can definitely put who was there.
I think it's important just to list which board members were making that decision.
Certainly.
Thank you. So you could add those. Also, at one point in the sign discussion, I'm sorry, I've lost it. I think it's on page 8. It says ready instead of read. We're talking about reading signs, and it says ready. I'll try to find that and let you know. That's just a clerical error.
Peter, do you want to approve the minutes as corrected, or do you want them to come back?
I think we should approve them and let staff correct it, because it's really been
it's been a
quite
long
late now.
time.
So I'll move that we approve the minutes as corrected.
I will second that.
Motion by Balte, second by Lou. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, none? Thank you. Maybe we have time to do one more set? Okay, January 10th. Let's see, that was the one on 4256 El Camino and 350 Cambridge, 380 Cambridge. That was a long meeting. That was a lot of paper.
I'll move that we approve
And-
the minutes. Oh, sorry.
Any comments or changes?
I noticed one thing on, I think it was this meeting where we were discussing with Randy Pop. Unfortunately, they only came to me yesterday digitally, so I don't have a page to
Yeah.
reference to, but there was a comment in there where Randy Pop and I were discussing something, and a whole paragraph was attributed to me when I think it was Randy speaking. I have to dig it up, so give me a few minutes to find it, I guess.
Well, I think that's a clerical error, which we can correct afterwards.
That's fair
Staff is
enough.
nodding.
Okay, then go ahead with your motion.
All right, I'll move that we approve those minutes for January 10th with a correction by Balte.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion by Thompson, second by Balte. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, no opposition, and the final set is January 17th, 2019. Any comments, corrections, et cetera?
I'll abstain, I was not present.
I believe we had a subcommittee item on that one as well. And again, there's no record of that in the minutes. So again, I think that could be corrected without coming back to us, but it is important.
All right.
Right, so the subcommittee item on page 63 of the minutes, the subcommittee reviewed the details, the driveway gate, and the height of the light poles. And also on page 56 of the minutes, which is with regard to one of the cell projects, David had referenced several times the CAC report. And I think that what he intended to say was the CTC report, which is Columbia Telecommunications Corporation, and they're a city independent consultant.
And
And
we should,
that occurs multiple times.
and it should be spelled out the first time it occurs.
Thank you.
Not by the speaker, but by the transcriber.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for January 17th, 2019 as corrected.
Is there a second?
Second that.
All right. All those in favor say, let's see, motion by Lou, second by Hirsch, is that right?
Yes, aye.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye?
Aye. We are caught up on our minutes for the first time in many months. Thank you. I am going to ask to be excused for the balance of the meeting. I will leave it to my colleagues to take care of everything else. And we will have a 5-minute break, and then we'll get to the rest of you. Apologize for the delay. All we can tell you is we're doing better than we usually do.
is a preliminary study for small cell nodes at 250 Hamilton Avenue. It's a request by SureSight on behalf of AT&T for a preliminary architectural review of the deployment of 17 small cell wireless communication facilities on utility poles and streetlights in the public right-of-way in downtown North and University South neighborhoods and adjacent to Monroe Park, Green Acres, and Town and Country. The staff report, please.
Good morning, board members. The project description for this preliminary, Rebecca Atkinson, planner. The project description for this preliminary architectural review application is as described. I'd like to thank AT&T for filing a preliminary architectural review application for many reasons, including the transparency notice and opportunity to provide early comment that this application provides to members of the public and the ARB prior to the formal applications coming in. So thank you for that. Let's see. In terms of a project overview, the number of nodes that you see in your project application and project plans are 17, and it would be one or multiple clusters coming in for a formal application. The locations are generally within the downtown area, University South and downtown North, and then adjacent to other neighborhoods and adjacent to Town and Country. So one node is on El Camino Real near Monroe Park, and the other, another node is on Arrasatero near Green Acres. There might be future phases, we don't know, potentially up to 33 nodes, and currently AT&T operates macro sites and has an existing DAS system. Here are a couple maps. These maps are also attachments to your staff report, and it shows the basic locations of the nodes and distribution. AT&T proposes to utilize existing streetlight and wood utility pole locations, and there are a variety of design configurations that they will review with you today. Please pay special attention to the specific equipment proposed for the purposes that the equipment differs in size and capacity, and as such influences aesthetics. I'd like to highlight that this application will debut 5G to Palo Alto, in which case the majority of nodes would have both 4G and 5G antennas and radios. Staff outlined some anticipated design changes for streetlight and wood utility pole designs on packet pages 78 and 81. If you're interested in seeing the 5G design more closely than what is presented in the staff report on page 80 and in the project plans, we do have a photo in our slide presentation of the San Francisco 5G mock-up that the AT&T provided to us. I just showed in the staff presentation just some of the basics of the proposed configurations, and AT&T will review these designs more specifically. Let's see, while processing applications before us, staff is also continuing to look into the latest technologies and designs elsewhere. Staff is beginning to see designs for streetlights with radios integrated into the pole and access through panels with top-mounted antennas, as well as poles that also host the radios and antennas within the pole themselves. Staff also noticed emerging new radios that continue to become smaller than what we have seen in some other applications. Departments are reviewing the technical site constraints at each of the node locations, such as trenching relative to street trees, the presence of underground basements, and noise and compliance with FCC safety standards will be reviewed with formal applications. What we hope to achieve today is to receive detailed early feedback from the public and Architectural Review Board members. We also hope to discuss the key questions from AT&T on siting, design configurations, and screening. And these questions will be posed in their presentation, as well as on packet page 96. We'd also like to discuss topics raised in the staff report, including node design and screening, nodes in scenic areas, nodes proposed near historic buildings and districts, and nodes with marketing banners. Please see packet pages 82 through 87 for identification of some of the specific nodes that intersect with each of the aforementioned topics. For further clarification, staff reviewed the alternatives to the corner locations presented in the project plans, and it appears that these alternative locations might be less visible in general and follows through on original ARB feedback on other applications that corners are not preferred. While these would be locations that were alternatives to Node 33, Node 34, and Node 35, and AT&T will be outlining those alternatives in their presentation. Staff also had a question for ARB members as well as the AT&T and primarily the AT&T team. Staff had a question regarding the wood pole design on Encina. Given that the equipment orientation and placement does not currently comply with standard clearance and other requirements, is it possible to utilize the configuration similar to streetlights on this wood pole? For preliminary architecture review, it is an informal and non-binding application, and there will be no motion that aggregates ARB member feedback. At places, I will provide you copies of correspondence that we received since the staff report publication, as well as additional materials, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, this is not a quasi-judicial matter. I'd like to offer anyone a chance to disclose any communications or tell us if you visited the site. David?
None.
Alex?
I visited all but one of the sites on Tuesday.
Ozma?
I've had no communication, and I haven't had a chance to go to all the sites.
I've visited the sites, and I also received emails from, I guess, engineering companies who proposed various kinds of vaults and ways of pushing forward other technologies for this, which I've asked Rebecca to photocopy and pass out to the board just so you can see. I also looked into some of the radio equipment that's available from Ericsson, the company the applicant is proposing, and this is in response to information I saw in the packet, but there is an additional radio being manufactured now for underground use, which I thought interesting for the board to see. So I'd just like to disclose that information is out there. Okay, with that, the applicant can make a presentation. You'll have 10 minutes. If you could state and spell your name, please.
Hi, board members. Thank you very much. Sorry, let me grab this slide.
Name, Peter? Her name?
Yeah, if you could state.
My name is Angela Kung. I'm a director of external affairs with AT&T. It's Angela, A-N-G-E-L-A, Kung, K-U-N-G.
Thank you.
So, just start here. Okay. So I'm just here just to give you a little bit of an overview first about just why we're here, and then we'll go into the most important part, which is obviously the design aspect of it. Right now, you guys all know, I'm sure, demand for wireless is on the rise. Everybody has a cell phone. 77% have smartphones now. We have households that rely primarily on wireless. There's no more landlines. Some houses still have them, but primarily, 62% of households don't have wireless, don't have landlines now. And 76% of 911 calls are on wireless phones. So this data and the ability for capacity is becoming more important than ever. And especially in a town like Palo Alto, as you guys know, with small businesses, 98% of small businesses rely on wireless technology. So what we've been able to do is provide this, and you'll see here, it's a small cell. And what small cell, just to give you an overview of it, is basically it's offloading from a macro. So macros are what you historically see on, they kind of disguise as trees or on top of buildings. What this is doing is this is taking off capacity from there so that more people can be on their phones doing whatever they're via data or via calls. So you'll see here a macro is much bigger, but it's a longer distance. And then you'll see that a current small cell 4G is it's the light pole standard, and it goes about up to 1,200 feet. Then when we get down to 5G, it's still a light pole, so it's the height of the light pole, but then you're gonna even shorter distance, but it's able to do more with technology. And so this is kind of a comparison of the three different heights of next to a human being. You'll see here that this is able to show you how it works from the macro to the small cell to the user itself. So we're really excited to unfold this technology here in Palo Alto, but also 5G is part of this. And the reason why this is so important is 5G is the new technology. It's going to be for internet use of things, for AV, for all kind of the next step. And so what 4G and 5G were able to do, because we're able to do it on small cell, this technology is able to be smaller, better, and also less intrusive. So what we've been able to do here with our 17 sites is we're going to show you how the design we have and the options we have, and we're hoping that we get your feedback and thoughts on the actual designs. I'm going to have Laura Miners from Shoresite, who on behalf of AT&T is going to talk about the actual designs themselves.
Thank you, Angela. My name is Laura Miners, Laura. Miners, MEINERS.
Thank you.
With Shoresite Consulting, representing Ericsson and AT&T, to present this preliminary review application for the deployment of 17 small cell wireless sites. We have been following the progress of other wireless carriers, and we are taking your feedback from those hearings into consideration. We are looking forward to your recommendations and input on our preliminary design prior to moving forward with our formal application submittal. As we move through the following slides, please note that everything presented is also in the staff report. The slide showing now is the list of sites. Of our 17 sites, 3 are 4G only. 13 have 4G and 5G equipment on streetlight poles, and we only have 1 wood pole with 4G and 5G proposed. As Rebecca mentioned earlier, these are mostly in the downtown north and University South neighborhoods. And we do not have any sites adjacent to residential zones or residences. This is a map of sites. Rebecca also showed you a map of the site. This is presented to help visualize where the sites are located. This slide provides some history on how we came to our proposed design. We have received staff comments and recognize the constraints shown. Addressing the constraints, we recognize that we are presented with opportunities to improve our design, including providing a uniform, streamlined aesthetic design for all sites, concealing the 4G antennas and radios in one shroud on top of the pole, concealing the 5G antennas and radios also in one shroud just below the 4G antenna, and installing all other equipment in underground vaults or pull boxes. This is the slide showing our corner pole alternates. For these 3 sites, the primary candidate selected is a pole located on a corner. This is discouraged per the planning guidelines, as Rebecca said. So the 3 alternate sites are presented for your consideration. This slide shows our most recent design configurations. And I would like to point out that we have received comments from utility staff to remove the disconnect box from the face of the pole as shown on the most recently submitted plans. We are now proposing to install a fused disconnect in the adjacent pole box. In the following slides, we have equipment specifications shown that call out the dimensions of the proposed equipment. We are happy to discuss the proposed equipment further with the board. This is our configuration 1, which is our light pole with just 4G equipment proposed on the top of the pole. The shroud seen in the photo sim contains the antenna and the radios. And here is the equipment specification for the shroud containing the radios and the antenna. Our primary design option for light poles configuration number 2 is our 4G plus our 5G equipment. This is the primary design option for 13 of our light pole sites. It encloses all equipment and 1 4G shroud on top of the pole, plus 1 5G shroud located below the mast arm. And here is our equipment spec sheet for the 5G site. Configuration number 3 is our wood pole. we are proposing 4G and 5G equipment on the pole. It encloses all equipment and one 4G shroud on top of the pole, plus one 5G shroud side mounted to the pole. And we have checked the clearances, and we do believe they meet the current clearances, but we are happy to take any recommendations on the design of this wood pole. This is the equipment spec for the 4G antenna on the wood pole. This is our primary design option for the radio shroud on the wood pole. We do have an alternate radio shroud option presented on slide 23. For the light poles, we do have other alternate designs we would like to present, including this alternate design number 1, the side arm design. This includes space for 4 radios, and the antenna will be mounted above the pole. Also, our holster design, which is our light pole alternate design number 2. This includes space for 5 radios and the antenna mounted to the side, as shown. And here is our alternate radio shroud for our wood pole. This shroud proposes a decreased height, but increased depth and width. This slide presents some questions for the ARB, also shown in the project description. Thank you for your time and consideration. This concludes our presentation, and we are open for questions and discussion.
Thank you. Do we have any public speaker comments or cards? Seeing that we have no public comments, I'd like to see if there's any questions from board members.
On the alternatives on the wood pole, what are we being asked to review today? Your preference on those? Could you go back and just show us clearly which ones are the alternatives?
How do we go back here? Can someone help me with the slide? Is there, let's see. Yeah, I think I got it. It's just being really slow here.
Yeah.
So we have, this is our primary design option.
Where is that on the pole?
Do
you have it in
I'm sorry, this
elevation somewhere?
The presentation is being slow. Hold on. Enable editing, I see. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
That's it?
The proposal is shown here on the photo sim. It's located below the power line. I think is that the power line or the comm line? I think it's the comm line, actually. I believe the bottom of the shroud is proposed at, I think, 11 feet. And I think we can move that a little bit closer to the comm line if necessary. We also have this alternate radio shroud that could be mounted up to 16 feet or so.
There's different elevations to other connections to wood poles. Is that correct to say? Or are they all at standard elevations so that you can fit your radios into areas that are absolutely clear of other competition with other utilities?
If I'm understanding your question, you're asking about the clearances to the comm line, or I'm not
just curious about why you make a choice of one of these as your preference versus the others.
David,
in
let's
this
get
specific
to that
area?
as we have a discussion. I'm looking for more focused questions. Does anybody else have anything specific? I would like then to ask you to address quickly, because we did have a member of the public speaking regarding radiation from your cells, and that is not, I understand, our purview. Nonetheless, we had somebody make the effort to come here. Could you address, please, that public member's concern about
Yes,
having these close
can,
to them?
Oh, yeah, I can do that. We definitely want to address the concerns of the public, and we did prepare some preliminary emissions reports and submitted them to staff. According to those reports, the emissions are less than 1% of the allowable public exposure limit, including 0.35% for a person standing on the ground, and 0.89% for a person directly adjacent on a second-story area.
At what distance is it that amount?
I believe it's 10 feet.
10 feet, okay. Thank you. Last question I have quickly, if you could tell us about the disconnect switches on the streetlight poles that are now being relocated in the ground. Is that absolutely correct?
Yes, yeah. We had received initial comments from the utility staff that they wanted the disconnect box being mounted to the face of the pole consistently at 8 feet. And during a meeting subsequent to that, I believe it was earlier this month, actually, utility staff said that they would prefer if we remove the disconnect box from the face of the pole and install it underground in the pole box. And we can do that. That's possible. It's called a fuse disconnect. And we will go forward with that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add a question to that? How big is that disconnect switch?
The one that we are no longer using, I'm not sure, because we're not using it anymore. The fuse disconnect is very small in the box.
Yes, thank you.
The switch, David, was about 6 inches square that was mounted on the light pole, but I'm hearing you say that switch is not any longer part of the proposal, or will not be.
Correct.
Okay, great. So I'd like to bring this back to the board, and then this is just a informational type meeting, so we're just offering comments. I'd like to, after everybody says their piece, see if we can get some clarity of direction for the applicant if it's confusing. Lastly, I'd like to point out to my colleagues that on the applicant's description on page 96, there's a list of questions, 1 through 5. I think they're good questions, and we should be cognizant and try to address our comments towards those as well as anything else. So with that said, David, why don't you give us a start?
I think this proposal is fantastic.
Microphone.
Got it. Did you hear me? Okay. I mean, the clarity of this presentation is quite amazing to me. The consistency of each description is very clear in your. That's why I didn't visit the site, because I think you told me enough information right here that one could say immediately that it answers most of your questions, most of a question that you one might have, certainly my questions anyhow. I think this equipment is, may I say, considerably better than what we've seen before. And I would wish it would become a standard for Palo Alto. And this is really important to say, because the city really has to speak up as to what is going to be placed on their streets in every neighborhood. And in fact, that decision really should be made by the council, I guess. And I would urge that that statement is underlined in our comments today. I think we need to get there soon, because these are going to happen. This is an essential change in our technology to date. Undoubtedly, 5 years from now, it'll be very different. But right now, I think it's very, very important to make this decision. And so many other people had concerns in our last presentation that I would hope that the city would react to this right away. I urge planning to make that happen. I really don't have too much to say. I think a disconnect switch is a very reasonable sized element. Peter mentions that he has seen other equipment that might be even a little bit smaller than what you're presenting, and we would always look for the smallest possible that achieves what you need to achieve. But I'm incredibly pleased by the presentation. Obviously, you have a little bit of an advantage here because you have all these downtown poles that are steel poles that you can wire through the middle, and you don't have exposed cabling on the outside of the wood pole. The wood pole is always going to be the question, I think, throughout the city, but I think we need to work very hard together to find a minimal impact on the environments in our neighborhoods. That's really all I have to say.
David, could I get you to address some of these questions? They were talking about which arrangement on these light poles are we interested in? And I hear you being positive, but which one are you positive about?
Yes, okay. So, I mean, to repeat what I was saying before is that there's such limited space on these poles when you have all these other facilities connecting to them. I would always say let's go for the most minimal one, minimal impact, although sort of aesthetically I kind of like the technical ones that are more exposed. I think in the end for this community it would be better to minimize the impact on the pole with mass of radio enclosures. Probably I would say the simplest one of the three is the one to choose. It will just be less visible.
Thank you, David. Alex?
Great, thank you for your presentation. So I think many of the locations are good. I think there were a lot of the locations are sort of like mid-block with evergreen trees. I think many of the locations work well. The ones that I made notes of, I think fall into like, I guess I have four categories. So one is, there are some that are next to like 3- and 4-story buildings. So I think that would be like, for example, like 26, 27, and 31. And the one that I will just highlight is like for me, 27, which is the one at the Walgreens building at University and Bryant, that there's a balcony like directly opposite the proposed pole. And the balcony, I think, is at the height of the antenna. So to me, that is a concern. There are some that are on very narrow sidewalks, and I think those are 24 and 31. So I say many places in downtown we have like 12-foot sidewalks, so you're going to be 10 feet away from the building. But in some places we only have, I don't know exact dimension, but maybe they're like 7, maybe they're like 6 or 7 feet or 8 feet. Those are like the old streets that have not been widened, like some of the newer streets. So I think that that's a concern. And then it presents the challenge of like, what does this look like up close? Like if I'm 6 feet away from this shroud, what do I see? And I've been on the board for a long time. We've never really looked at them that closely. Usually we've looked at the mock-up and they're up at the top of a telephone pole. But I think that we would actually need to see something up close, especially if you've got like ventilation screens on there. Like what is that? Like it looks fine in the rendering, but I really want to see something up close. Third is, I think there were some that are on corners that were exposed. I think Rebecca mentioned that. I had only looked at 2. I thought that, let me back up for a second. There are ones that are exposed, some of them on corners, and Rebecca mentioned those. I think the 2 that popped out at me were 34 and 35. I think, Rebecca, you'd mentioned 33, and I think I looked at 33. I thought that was okay. There are some that are just in open areas, like the one on Arrastradero is very, very open, without trees. And then I think my last comment is on color. And so you're proposing things on new and existing, or on existing poles, and then the existing street lights in Palo Alto is a mix of all different things. And I think I like the ones that are generally like the dark green color, but for example, like 35, which is I think at High in Everett, there's like a brand new pole. It's shiny aluminum, and then the thought of adding a shiny aluminum shroud on top of that just seems to me like not appealing. So I think you've proposed alternate locations, but I haven't looked at I haven't reviewed any of the alternate locations. But I would just say that I think the color is a concern to me for the ones that are very bright and reflective. So I did not look at number 38 on Encina in person. I think I would just say, just as a caution, is that I think the board as a whole has had problems with the wood pole ones. And sometimes it's really the nitty-gritty things, like the rendering may be okay, but it's the amount of standoff from the pole, if there are exposed wires or anything like that. Usually I think when we've had trouble with those, and but we've had some approved. We try to minimize the amount of standoff and try to hide all the wiring. So I think that's where I'm on there. I don't have a strong preference between the different types of different cabinet boxes that you have shown there. For me, it's more of the I think I would have to see it in person. I think the issues that I've noticed before is like if it's overhanging a sidewalk, and then the clearance to the pedestrians. The ones where I've seen where you're trying to overhang something above the sidewalk and it's only like 9 feet or so, seem way too low to me. Like I really do like to have them up taller if possible. Okay, so I think that's all that I have prepared comments. And then it's not prepared, I didn't notice this list of questions on page 96, but I will take a look at that while some of the other board members are speaking.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, Ozma?
Hi there. So I was looking at the alternate locations for 33, 34, and 35. Based off of what I can see off of Google Maps and how you rendered them here, I think your original proposal location poles are furthest from adjacent buildings. The alternates that you've proposed seem to be a lot closer to either residential or office buildings. And so I would disagree with the alternate locations just based off of that quick analysis. So that would be my response to one of your questions, question number 4 about the alternate. I don't like all 3 of the alternates, basically. Going to question 1 about which design option is preferable. Attachment D and in your presentation don't have renders of what your alternates would be. Is that right? You're showing me just this object, and I have to guess what this object is replacing in your rendering. And I think that makes it hard. I mean, I think Board Member Hirsch was asking, for example, for the alternate wood pole equipment, what equipment is that piece replacing? And it kind of sounds like it's replacing the bigger one with the smaller one. So that one makes sense to me. For the holster solution, I don't exactly understand where that goes on the pole, and I don't know if the rest of the board would be okay, but I was going to ask the applicant to explain exactly how that goes and where it goes on the pole, because that could go anywhere, and I actually don't even know what scale this is at, if it's holding in a bunch of stuff. So if you could provide clarification on that, and for the sidearm radio, what object?
Ozma, could you finish anything else you have to comment on?
Sure.
And we'll get to that. I'd like to go over that in more detail.
Okay. For the wood pole shroud, it looks very messy. So as you proposed it, I'm not ready to approve that design or not ready to believe that that's the best solution for that. wood pole design. If you just look at the drawings, and even the rendering is a little blurry, but if you look at the drawings, which sort of shows the equipment a bit more in detail, it looks like there's a lot of extra surface-mounted stuff in addition to the equipment, like the conduit. I thought that was extra structure for a second, but I think it's just conduit. I think that could be better resolved aesthetically. For the uniform design for all sites, in general, I think Alex has a point that if there's some poles that are extra shiny, and that is not a good thing, I would say it makes more sense to do something that is site-specific as a general thing. Your question on number 5 about shroud skirts over the mast arm, I'll need more clarification on that when we get the applicant to come back. And then you have a secondary 4G equipment enclosure type, which is the art-wrapped utility box. And I actually think that's pretty cool. In Los Angeles, they have a bunch of these in downtown, and the art on them is incredible. It really makes the streetscape so interesting. Like, I saw one that was, it looked like a stack of $100 bills, but I didn't know it was a utility box. Like, I just thought this was like a really cool piece of art. So I think that's a nice opportunity. And if we're stuck with having to do something like that, that's kind of a nice way to make lemonade out of lemons. Okay, I'll say that for now.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is, before I offer any comments of my own, is to step through with the board. I see 2 different conditions here. One is antennas and radio equipment mounted on streetlight poles. The other is a wood utility pole. On the streetlight pole, I see 3 different proposals of how to put the equipment and the antennas on. I'd like to make sure we all understand which those 3 options are and get each board member to express a preference. So if I could, with the applicant coming forward, help you, my understanding is that the first option is a shroud on the top of the streetlight, which contains both the radios and the antenna. That's alternate D1. Am I reading that correctly?
Attachment D1, I think. Let's see here. Trying to navigate to the correct slide on the presentation.
I'm looking to my colleagues on page 100 of our packet. Has a black and white small image showing that shroud on top of a light pole. That is one of the options. Staff, we just want to get a really clear understanding of what's going on. Is that correct? Option D1.
Right.
Okay.
So my understanding is that D1 is the 4G, and then the other one is not an option, it's 4G and 5G, so it's a different type altogether.
I think that's right. The 5G is a separate type of shroud in a different configuration.
So I guess what we want clarification is, what is the alternate to 4G?
Okay. So this is our 4G only site as proposed. This is our primary design option for our 4G only site. And if we go down here, let's see. Why is this not? I'm doing the wrong way. Okay. Let me just. Okay, so here is our light pole alternate design, number 1, for our 4G radios. This basically would go on the side of the pole near the top, and the dimensions are, what slide is it? Yeah. So yeah, this is basically would be mounted on the side with the antenna mounted on the top, which would be a shorter antenna than what is proposed currently. So if you're concerned about the height of our equipment, you would probably prefer this option or the other alternate.
Okay, so to clarify, option attachment D2 has some sort of side-mounted radio equipment with an antenna still on top of the pole. Okay, then, and that includes this thing you call the holster. That's just another way of side-mounting equipment?
Right. The holster design does include the 4G antenna, however.
I see, that's the 4G antenna as well as the equipment in one device. Okay, so you can see that lack of clear images showing what these look like is leaving us all befuddled.
So you would like a
when we come back,
photo
we'd like
some?
to see, well, if we want to go with that, I'm going to try to give you clearer direction of what you should put your time into. The third option, as I understand it, is some sort of street boxes. Am I reading that right? For 4G equipment, that's the art boxes.
Wait, before we go away from this design option alternate on page 106, I just wanted to bring the board's attention to this little tiny picture that's in the bottom right corner that looks like a little rendering of what that might be.
That was included in the spec sheet, and that is kind of not an accurate representation of what that would look like because it would have an antenna also on the top.
And then the side holster one doesn't have a little render.
Correct.
Okay, so for 4G equipment, the third option is ground-mounted equipment, and what you would be proposing is art-wrapped utility boxes. So that's our third option.
We are calling we are calling the design options that are acceptable to AT&T but not acceptable to staff the secondary design options. Okay. Anything under secondary design option is not acceptable by staff, including the art-wrapped utility boxes, which is not allowed per transportation staff.
Okay, thank you. Then I'd like to point out, if we're still talking about street poles, the 5G equipment, which is the newer technology, is only being proposed as a different shaped shrouded equipment with an antenna that's mounted near the top of the utility pole. And what page is that image on? What would that look like?
Packet page 80.
Page 80. Yes, that's very good, Amy. So on packet page 80, we can see what in a 5G antenna looks like. It's mounted just below the mast of the arm holding the light head itself. And there is no option for 5G equipment? That's what the choice is?
Not at this time. However, we are amenable to receiving any recommendation from the board.
Is this image 5G and 4G together or just 5G?
This specific antenna shroud is just for 4G. The image, I'm sorry, 5G. Oh, that is 5G and 4G. The 4G is on top, and the 5G is around the pole.
Okay, then I'd like to state that, just to give an example for the rest of my colleagues, that I prefer the pole-mounted equipment on top of the light pole in a shroud, even if it's a little bit taller. And I'm okay with the 5G antenna the way it's shown in that rendering there. I think that would be a good standard to show to the city. I do not like the idea of a sidearm mounted radio, and I do not like the ground mounted equipment. I don't think those meet our standards. So I'd like the rest of us to comment on those choices, please. David?
What are the boxes on that illustration, 80, that are down below? They have nothing to do with this particular equipment?
Oh, I can answer that question. The photo on page 80 is of a mock-up from San Francisco of 4G antennas and radios, as well as 5G antennas and radios. And instead of having the radios and other equipment as proposed for Palo Alto underneath the 4G antenna, some of the equipment is actually mounted on the pole here. So this was, an actual mock-up that we wanted to show, absent a mock-up here in Palo Alto. But it's my understanding from the visual sims and elevations in the preliminary project plans that the equipment that's shown in this photo as mounted, side mounted to the pole, would instead be top mounted.
Only on top, okay. That's perfect.
What is your preference, David?
Oh, on the top.
And are you okay with the 5G equipment on the shroud proposed?
The way it's aligned below, absolutely.
Alex?
Yes, now I'm confused.
I can understand that.
Most of these are supposed to be the 4G and 5G, right? You're saying 13 of them are 4G and 5G? But that doesn't seem to match up with the simulations, right? The simulations are showing mostly the 4G option.
Yeah, it doesn't match up.
Yeah, I don't
It's
really
like
understand.
I think
I really-
much of our work has been concerned with 4G installations at this meeting and in previous ones.
I know, but the problem is that this project is really about the 5G, right? If most of the locations that we're looking at,
I'm seeing most of the locations seem to have some 5G component, and all of those, I think, are that shroud mounted near the top of the pole, oval-shaped thing.
I think here, what would be most helpful for the applicant and staff in regard to the bigger picture is any kind of feedback about the mounting of the 5G equipment, because it is being debuted here in the preliminary for the first time in Palo Alto, 5G. And any comments that you might have about the project plans, you know, as proposed, because the applicant team did select what their primary design configuration would be, and also wanted to show other design options that had been considered in case, you know, you wanted to add and further supplement anything. Staff is very much interested in, you know, as much feedback as you could possibly provide as well, because it will all go into formal applications that are anticipated to come quite soon. Thank you. And staff's questions are actually outlined in the staff report. Thank you.
okay, well, I'm generally okay with the pole top mounted antenna, but it seems like the San Francisco mock-up is a contemporary pole, Cobra head pole, and most of the poles downtown are traditional fluted poles. And I think in the past we've had some other companies propose pole top mounted equipment, but they would replace the whole pole. But I think this, as I read the plans, you're just attaching things to the existing poles. So I think the San Francisco model may be problematic. I think that I need to see like some sort of mock-up or a sample of the shroud that you're proposing with the vents, because I've never seen anything with the vents before. And if there are like screens or louvers on the vents, I am interested in that. And I have no other recommendations until I see that. And I think I'm fine if the city staff doesn't want to consider any of the secondary alternates, and I'm fine with that.
Thank you, Alex. Ozma?
Peter, oh, I'm sorry.
David, it's Ozma's turn,
Yeah.
please. Ozma, I want to hear what you think about these. Sorry, everybody, I want to keep us focused on stepping through this. It's so confusing. I want to go piece by piece. The question now is these options for the 4G equipment and whether the 5G shroud is acceptable. Ozma.
So from what I understand, the image that we're looking at on page 80 of our report would be an alternate to everything that's in the drawings right now, as it's proposed. At the moment, I think the 5G equipment that sort of sticks out, I think could actually be better integrated into the pole. It's close, it's almost there. It's kind of, you know, it's almost compact, but I actually think it could be even more compact and streamlined so that you could get a really simple partie of like a whole pole. And it sounds like, from what we've seen, that is possible in other places. So I would say I'm not yet satisfied with the image that we see on page 80, even though I would say it's probably aesthetically the closest to anything. It's the closest to what I think it could be out of all the other design options.
Okay, David, what were you going to say?
Yeah, sorry. On your A 33.4, you indicate, that's in our set of drawings, you're indicating that in case there's a banner bracket and banners for a particular street, you're going to mount some of your radios, can I say that's what they are, below the banner, which is a little different than what you would mount if you were doing it just underneath the...
If I can address that, we've had a recent meeting earlier this week with banner staff, and they had some questions which we are addressing, and we are hoping to be able to move the banner slightly down so we can put our 5G equipment on top. Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. That's good.
Thank you. So then I'd like to bring up another question about the streetlight designs, which staff has brought up, that we have in Palo Alto several different styles of streetlights. Some are clean, polished aluminum or steel. Some are fluted with painted green. Should the applicant and should staff be pressing for a single design that's consistent to the city, or should we be looking for several designs that are more appropriate to each installation? And then in any detailed questions we have regarding, like Alex was mentioning, the ventilation slots on the shroud, regarding how well that fits into the pole itself, what kind of feedback can we give the staff and the applicant? David, why don't you start with that?
Okay, well, I'm all for consistency here with the whole city. If we could possibly do that, make a aesthetic decision on a lot of this and be very consistent throughout the city. That seems to me the logical way to do it. Unfortunately, there are a number of companies sort of competing for their poles, I guess. And to me, that's very unfortunate that we should make the aesthetic decision. It seems like there's a lot of variety in the manufacture of some of these items. And some of them are obviously aesthetically better than others. And perhaps functionally as well, I don't know. We can't speak to that. But aesthetically, absolutely. And I think if we could agree ourselves, we would present an idea for the council to reconsider citywide materials like this.
Alex, you've already touched on this a bit, but do you have anything to add?
No, I think they need to be site-specific because the poles are so different. Mm-hmm. So I would say maybe one for traditional poles, the fluted ones, one for sort of the more modern Cobra head type ones, and then third would be would be the wood pole on Encina.
And Ozma, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I touched on it earlier, but I would agree with Board Member Liu on that front. I still think that, amongst all the poles, there could be sort of minimal design intent where, it's not like we're seeing this one with the vents on one and this one that's really small on the other, but if we could try and tailor the really small, minimal, compact design and then, alter it per the site specificity, I think that would be most appropriate.
Okay, I agree with Ozma and Alex that we have existing, unfortunately, David, several styles of light poles in town, and I think these new installations should match the style of the poles that exist. I think it'd be possible to come up with 2 or perhaps 3 standardized sets of details. How do you fit onto a fluted traditional pole or a modern steel one? I wish we could do it all as one standard, but I think you need to have at least 2, if not 3, different types of installations. Alex's comments about the detailing of how these shrouds work and fit and mount is critically important, and it needs to be carefully studied as the applicant brings forth an actual proposal. One last thing on the streetlight. Staff has asked us to look at some streetlight proposals that are manufacturers making, integrating the equipment into the light. Rebecca, could you show us what that is again so we can give you feedback on that? This is not obviously a direct something the applicant is requesting, but staff has asked for our feedback on this issue. And I'd like to see what we think about that.
Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and pull up that example slide from the staff presentation. But in general, yes, thank you very much. Streetlights, perform, obviously the standard function, but also streetlights are becoming used for other matters at this point. So I think that we're seeing the marketplace evolve all the different functionality for streetlights. So I would like to get some feedback on that. So let me go ahead and find that portion of the staff presentation.
While she's finding that, the question, I think, is that manufacturers are making poles that integrate this radio and antenna equipment into the street light. And I think staff is asking for our opinion if that's something that the city should consider. Here we go. Rebecca.
It also seems possible, these are just examples that we found on the web, but it seems possible that these poles come in designs that match our style placement guide for poles on El Camino, poles in Cal Ave, and poles downtown, as well as, of course, any number of more standard, aluminum, maybe bright and shiny. I think you can pretty much make a selection of any pole type.
And Rebecca, to be clear, these would be just replacements on specific locations. It's not a throughout the town location. We're not changing every light pole in town. These are just in addition to the ones we already have.
The current policy identified by Public Works is wherever the style placement guide calls for a certain type of pole, those are replaced when work is done on a new pole. So, for example, any of the poles that are proposed, on and between Lytton and Channing in the downtown area would be called for, streetlight replacement in order to cumulatively move our, move the aesthetics forward in that direction, consistent with policy. The downtown design guidelines also call for streetlight replacement, so that action is very consistent with our guiding documents. And so in any case, you would expect to see in a formal application streetlight replacement for those nodes downtown in the identified area. You'd also expect to see streetlights replaced on El Camino and so forth. So it's standard to do this type of replacement as projects move forward. And if you have a new pole, there might also be an option instead of one that does not have the capability of incorporating the equipment into the pole, potentially choosing a pole that does have the ability to have the equipment integrated. From my early research, it appears that a pole with the integrated capability would be slightly wider than the more streamlined octagonal fluted designs that we currently see downtown. But, and so staff would be interested in feedback on that. It seems like a fair trade-off to get the more, to choose a pole that might have the capability of putting the equipment inside.
Thanks, Rebecca. Ozma, what's your feedback on that then?
The images that we're looking at on our screen right now are aesthetically a lot more coherent than anything else we've seen so far today. So I would be in favor of choosing a pole that would have this kind of integrated equipment. I wanted to clarify, in this image that we're looking at, would that integrate all the equipment that we have been seeing on these poles so far?
Staff just gave these as examples as opposed to, I could have put maybe like 4 more or a fewer. In this case, the one example has the antenna at the top mounted and the equipment inside the pole, the radios, and in the others, the antenna is fully integrated within the pole. Now, these examples are for 4G only, is my understanding, and they don't necessarily have this yet for 5G, although it could be coming out any day, I'm not sure. But I guess in the case of the AT&T application, the idea could potentially be to still have the 5G equipment strapped and mounted to the outside of the streetlight pole, but have the more streamlined version for 4G.
Alex, your thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you for doing the research, Rebecca. The last time that I looked at these integrated types of poles, they had really huge pedestal bases that were just ungainly. So it seems like a lot of progress has been made on these designs. So thank you for that. I guess the thing that I'm thinking about is that this kind of design may work where we have like a very exposed corner without any landscaping. I think that could work well. I would think that the more traditional acorn type of light might be problematic in that the light poles, say, for example, like on University Avenue, are very low. They're pedestrian oriented. And I would imagine that, like AT&T, their need for height would completely change the character of the street. So we would have to look at the height of the traditional acorn looking fixture. So I would say yes. I think if it can work, great. I think my last thought on that is that all of this stuff is going to change. So tacking stuff onto existing poles may seem not so great now, but it may be actually the better option in the long run, because these things will change and presumably get smaller. And why get stuck with a chunky looking light pole for 100 years? I would imagine that the cell phone, that all of these antennas, the lifespan is going to be shorter than the light poles.
David.
I'll backtrack a little and agree with what several have said about there being a number of varieties to solve the problem. I'm not suggesting that you don't have that option. So, but it seems to me that in the drawings that I've been looking at, I'm noting two different types of higher street light fixtures already accounted for in the shroud system that's been presented here. So it seems to me that there's been a considerable thought by the designers about the kind of light fixtures they'll be placing the shroud and upper element on. So I found that easy to read on the drawings. The acorn fixture is a light fixture. I think it's probably too low for what you're presenting, and should be kept as a decorative light fixture. I think if it's that low, as Alex says, then it really probably wouldn't suffice for your equipment on top of it, if I'm not mistaken. That's what I'm noting, that on University, for example, there are lower fixtures that are just light fixtures. They have no other equipment on them. And they're an older fixture as well, so they're nice to keep them just as they are. In fact, it would be nice to have more of them rather than less, but lighting in Palo Alto is pretty bad. Again, I prefer as much at the top of the pole as possible, especially where a pole is a more modern pole. And I don't think and again, the switching on the pole seems to be reasonable, and the idea of having to create a vault for a switch seems ridiculous to me. Because it has all kinds of other problems with switching that's like that. And the poles are easy, the metal poles are easy to cut a hole through and put a switch through and connect everything together. So again, I'm very pleased with the way it's been presented, except that somehow or other between the applicant and city planning, we could be seeing these alternatives better described.
David, we're trying to discuss the manufactured light poles and whether we agree that they're a good option.
Did I miss the point?
And I think I hear you saying that you're sort of okay with that. Rebecca pointed out a manufactured light pole that incorporates the antennas. And
The manufactured light pole, which is the one on the left in this drawing?
I think this image on the screen is an example of a light pole that's manufactured outside of the town, outside of AT&T.
It says, I mean...
Which has all these functions built into it, but it is a little bit heavier looking.
Oh, okay. Well, in a
what's your
very
take on that?
traditional setting, I would say that that's a really nice choice.
Okay, I'd like to caution the town. I hear Alex's words of wisdom, I think, that this technology changes fast, light poles don't. And you want to be very careful starting to introduce an additional light pole design, which is maybe not great, and we're stuck with that, even if the antennas and everything else changes. So not that it doesn't look better, it does, as Osman pointed out, but these are multifaceted decisions. So if I could shift us now, if we're done with the street light poles, we have one application, one proposal with a series of equipment mounted on a wood utility pole over near 75 Encina. And I don't understand how that incorporates 4G and 5G equipment, and your proposal is just not clear to me. So maybe the applicant could explain to us again what is proposed to be mounted on that pole, and staff could tell us what sort of feedback you're looking for on that.
Happy to. Excuse me. If you look on the plans that you have, I believe it's...
If you could speak into the microphone directly, thank you.
In your plans, it's in the 38 sheet series, site 38. The radio shroud is the lowest piece of equipment mounted on the pole. It's mounted to the face of the pole, and the radio shroud specifications were noted in our presentation this morning. Above that are the comm lines. Above that is the 5G antenna and radios in one shroud, side-mounted to the pole. Above that is the power line, and above that is our 4G antenna. Now, there's a pole top extension there to meet the safety requirements of GO95, which states that between the power line and the antenna on top, there must be a 6-foot separation.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
Thank you.
Osman, what's your take on that?
I think I mentioned it earlier. I think there's a way to integrate this design so that it looks less clunky. All of this stuff is really tacked on, a lot of exposed brackets and structure. I don't know. I think it can be designed better.
Alex?
Yes, my take on it, this one would not pass the ARB's vote based on our previous proposals.
And your particular opinion, Alex?
No, I think I would agree that I think that the lower cabinet boxes, I actually think they probably need to be shrouded, just based on other projects that we've looked at.
That is the shroud for our radios and our diplex.
Right, but I think you've got two, you're showing 2 or 3 different boxes on the lower part?
There's only one very large box below the comm line.
Okay, I thought I was looking at 2. I think in the past, on other projects, there have been 3, and we've required 1 shroud over all 3 boxes, and the shroud becomes really big. But it hides all of the different size boxes and stuff. And so I thought I was looking at 2. I could be wrong.
There are 2 rows of vents that might be confusing to you. The 2 rows of vents.
I think staff has a similar interpretation as Board Member Liu when looking at the elevations on sheet A.38.4.
So they're two side-by-sides? Okay, well, I'm not sure what I'm looking at. I would say you've got a variety of different, between the 4G and the 5G and the boxes, I think that's, I think you're asking, yeah, I think that's too much. I think we've actually always tried to simplify, like just keep it simple. So I think that this would not be acceptable.
Okay, and David, your opinion on this particular poll?
I like it.
You voted no on similar things that look just like this.
Well, okay, maybe it's just my preference, but I don't think we can really create a shroud that takes care of everything here. You're going to have this is a wood pole, is that right?
Yes, this is a wood pole, and there are 3 attachments total.
Yes. Well, it's a hard problem to solve, the wood pole, and no doubt it's our hardest problem in the city here. So
Staff would like to...
somehow it cleans up some of the stuff that's just tacked onto the wood of the pole itself. The free-floating quality of the attachments seems to work to me here. I'm really
I'll remind you,
confused by
David,
it all,
that-
but I know it's going to, the problem is that this is going to be what we see all over the city, right? Because only in certain areas do we have the metal poles. That being the case, there's no specific historic design to the pole and the connections like there are on metal poles. I prefer the B pole in New York City to all of the engineered poles that happened ever since the B pole, which is a very Victorian, wonderful pole. But when you get to a modern technology, something has to give. And in my view, I think this would work in the communities because it actually is trying hard to keep all of the wires and all those things close to the pole. And I think there's a relationship there. Technically, it's more modern in that sense that it makes those connections as minimal as possible and just shows them the way they are. That's my preference.
Thank you, David. So let me address this issue. It's something we've been struggling with on the board for quite a few applications now, and in my opinion, the side-mounted equipment on the pole is absolutely unacceptable. I cannot make the findings or recommend the findings that it's an aesthetic improvement in the town, and I believe the best way to do it is either to put the equipment out of sight, underground, or as we've seen several times, staff is pushing now to somehow conceal the radio equipment within the shroud above the utility pole. If we all note that the antenna itself is some 9 feet above the pole, we've seen applications on the streetlights where the radio equipment, which is smaller and smaller every cycle, is somehow concealed within that shroud up on the top. That just, to me, it's a visual extension of the pole, and in a metaphorical way, that is out of sight. It's so high up, it looks like a continuation of the pole, and you just don't see it. Whereas what Alex has been pointing out, when you have these large boxes close to the street, they're really unsightly. They're not attractive. I don't think they're a technological advantage to our society, David. I just think they're ugly, and we can do better. And I strongly encourage staff and the applicant to find ways just not to mount stuff like this on the pole. I'm left wondering what you can do about the 5G equipment. Is it always this self-contained package of antennas and radios in a rectangular or square format, or is there a way to streamline it more? I have opposed in the past shrouds mounted on the side of the pole, but Alex is pointing out, I think very correctly, that even a year ago, staff worked hard with other applicants to come up with shrouds that were long and elongated along the side of the pole that carefully concealed and integrated all of the equipment. I believe there's even a mock installation in town over near the library, which is obviously much better than this one. And that would be a preferable solution, although I still think there's other things we can do. That's trying to give feedback to the applicant, and I'm not hearing strong support for pole-mounted equipment, certainly not in this fashion. Alex.
One last item on the wood pole. So I think if I'm reading the drawings correctly, you're not showing any shroud around the bayonet. And I think we've asked for that on other projects, and I think that it's worked well. So I would, if you do go with the wood pole route, I would ask for consideration of a shroud around the bayonet.
Osma, would you like to add something?
Yeah, this is actually, so I would agree with Board Member Balte and Board Member Liu. I also wanted to mention, I know we moved on to the wood pole, but just briefly to respond to some of the comments that were made on the integrated pole, where all the equipment was inside this new design for a pole. I think while it's true that equipment does get smaller, it's also true that there's very little desire to get rid of it. Sometimes it just stays there and it could accumulate. And so for that reason, having an integrated solution, I think, is preferable, or aesthetically a better way to go. That's all.
Can I go on a little?
A little. Help yourself, David.
A little. All right. You have to take a look at the reality here. To run these wires up the side of a pole, the way it's done now, they tack on a metal cover or whatever it is, shrouds the wire going up the pole, and it's absolutely ugly and doesn't relate to the equipment whatsoever. I'm making a case here that you've made a case for, actually, it being more exposed and on its own, and related to its own self, and could get rid of a lot of the wiring that is just attached to the pole. If you take the wiring at the pole and then you put other equipment, and then you shroud that in something else, you're hiding all the reality of these systems. And so aesthetically, there's something to be said for just exposing them. And let them do their thing on the outside of the pole free, because they're tight connections the way you've designed them here. And I like it. I think it's very appropriate here. To shroud everything is to hide it for no reason. It just adds another layer. I think that piece on the top that you've done on all the metal poles is fine. It expresses what it is. And then we should carry that idea on the wood pole as well. It's going to be all over the city, and when they modernize and make it, and I agree, Peter, if it could be, all of that a good piece of it could be held at the top, then that's perfect, and then we won't have as much down below. But if we can't do that for the technical reasons you've described, I think we should just let it hang out there.
Okay, to staff and the applicant, I think we're wrapping up here, but do you have any questions or last comments from staff, perhaps, anything?
Just an announcement, I guess, and Jody can cover future meetings generally, but I just wanted to mention that March 21st, we are targeting coming to the ARB with kind of prescriptive standards for wireless. We collectively as a team are approaching and working to get feedback from carriers on the various options and thoughts that the city is having about how we would prescriptively write an ordinance. So this is going to be on your docket in the coming month.
And Amy, do you feel that you have an understanding of the position of the various board members on these issues?
I think everything is really worthwhile food for thought. Thank you very much.
Okay, now is your chance.
That was Rebecca, and then I would concur that we've gotten a full discussion today for a prelim. I think that was maybe even better than we expected to have, kind of everybody weigh in on these specific
Thank you.
things.
And then to the applicant who's pushing us to all this, you have the last word. Any comments or questions?
No, actually, thank you so much. We're actually going to take everything you guys said, put a lot of thought into it, and see what we can do and work with staff to best propose the best option for you guys. So when we come with our permit, we're hoping that you guys will be very satisfied.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll close this agenda item and with...
Just one.
Oh, okay, David, one last...
How does it all work with the stop clock?
This is a prelim ARB application, so as a rule, it's not a project under CEQA, and it is not subject to permit streamlining. When they come in with a formal application for major architectural review for a Tier 3 application, there will be an associated shot clock. And we're looking at the 60-day rule that passed and it became effective this January.
Thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.